The Senate confirmation hearing room pulsed with anticipation that Tuesday morning, a mixture of quiet murmurs and shuffling papers, echoing off the marble walls and high ceilings. Every seat was filled from the senators, lined up in their leather chairs, to the rows of reporters crammed into the press gallery, their pens and laptops at the ready, determined not to miss a single syllable. Television cameras from every major news network were pointed directly at the witness table. Even the overflow room was packed with staffers and interns craning their necks to watch the monitors. Outside, protesters gathered on the Capitol steps, their signs raised high, chanting for accountability, while lobbyists and political operatives whispered frantically in nearby hallways, already planning how to spin whatever might unfold inside. Millions of Americans at home tuned in, canceling morning meetings, texting family members to switch on the TV. It wasn't just another hearing. Everyone sensed it. Something big was coming. Pam Bondi sat at the witness table, the focal point of all those eyes, her hands neatly folded on the surface, her posture perfect, her expression the image of confidence. Her sharp navy suit was carefully chosen, its clean lines projecting authority and competence. She had been here before in courtrooms and press conferences, and she understood the value of appearances. Her blonde hair was immaculately styled, not a strand out of place. She had spent decades cultivating this image, the tough, unflappable prosecutor who never backed down, who carried herself with the calm assurance of someone who had faced hostile questions 100 times and always emerged intact. For her, this was supposed to be another such day, the culmination of years of work that would end with her confirmation to one of the most powerful positions in the administration. Across from her sat the senators of the Judiciary Committee, their expressions ranging from stern concentration to polite neutrality. Some flipped through their binders of notes, others tapped pens on the desk as if rehearsing questions in their minds. On the Democratic side, faces were sharp intent, clearly ready to scrutinize every detail of Bondi's record. On the Republican side, there was an air of confidence. This was supposed to be their nominee's coronation, not a trial. A few senators exchanged hushed comments, but as the chairman raised his gavel, the room stilled. The proceedings had gone as expected for the first 40 minutes. Bondi fielded questions about her record as Florida's Attorney General, emphasizing her work on human trafficking, drug prosecutions, and consumer protection. She cited statistics about conviction rates, rattled off examples of settlements her office had secured, and painted a picture of an office that had been disciplined, efficient, and unwavering in its pursuit of justice. Republican senators nodded approvingly, some even smiling at her polished delivery. The networks were preparing to clip the highlights for the noon news cycle. Everything seemed routine. Then, at exactly 10:47 a.m., the room shifted. Representative Jasmine Crockett, present to question Bondi, as part of the House delegation allowed in these joint sessions, leaned into her microphone. Crockett was calm, composed, her hands folded over a thick brown folder that sat directly in front of her. She had barely spoken all morning, only occasionally jotting down notes on her legal pad. But now, as she straightened in her chair, her eyes locked on Bondi. There was a glint there, a subtle spark that made several people in the gallery instinctively lean forward. She cleared her throat, waited a beat, and then asked the question that would detonate the room like dynamite. "Miss Bondi," she said, her voice steady and deliberate, carrying easily through the chamber's microphone, "can you explain to the American people what happened to the missing $11 billion from the Florida State Attorney General's office during your tenure?" The words landed like a thunderclap. For half a second, the entire room seemed frozen in disbelief. The silence was so complete, you could hear the faint whirring of a camera lens, adjusting focus. Senators stopped mid-motion. Reporter fingers hovered above keyboards. Even the protest chants outside seemed to fade into the background. $1 billion. It was not a small discrepancy. It was not the kind of allegation anyone could shrug off as paperwork, confusion. It was a number so massive that it demanded explanation immediately. Bondi's polished mask cracked just slightly, but in a room filled with high-definition cameras, even the smallest flicker was magnified. Her jaw clenched, her lips pressed together, her hands still resting on the table curled slightly tighter around the edge. Her eyes darted down to the folder in front of her, before snapping back to Crockett. It was only a second's hesitation, but every camera in the room caught it. "How dare you?" Bondi's voice rang out, sharp and indignant, slicing through the silence. The calm, measured tone she had maintained all morning was gone. Instead, her voice cracked with outrage. "How absolutely dare you stand here and fabricate such an accusation in front of this committee, in front of the American people? This is outrageous. But Crockett didn't flinch. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted the brown folder thick with papers and placed it squarely on the table in front of her. She opened it with careful precision, flipping past the first few pages until she reached the section she wanted. Then she looked back at Bondi, her voice unshaken, her words deliberate. "I have the receipts right here, Miss Bondi," Crockett said, holding up a set of documents so the cameras could catch the Florida state seal, emblazoned at the top. Every single transaction, every missing dollar, every questionable transfer. "So I'll ask again, where is the money?" The room gasped, reporters scrambling to type, senators shifting uneasily in their chairs. Behind Bondi, her legal team exchanged nervous glances, whispering furiously. Behind Crockett, her staff sat stone-faced, hands folded, but their eyes betrayed the tension of the moment. The silence that followed was not the quiet of routine hearings, but the loaded silence of a bomb waiting to go off. For a moment after Jasmine Crockett's words, the hearing room seemed suspended in time, like everyone was holding their breath. Then the silence shattered. Reporters leapt to their feet. Cameras zoomed in. Senators began whispering furiously to their aides. A wave of noise surged through the room, and the chairman was forced to bang his gavel repeatedly, his voice straining over the chaos as he called for order. Bonnie's face flushed crimson as she slammed her palm against the table, making the microphone jolt. "This is absolutely outrageous," she thundered, her voice rising higher than the polished statesman tone she had maintained all morning. "You're sitting here in front of the American people, making completely baseless accusations without a shred of evidence, without context, without—" But before she could finish, Crockett calmly lifted the document from her folder and held it up, the Florida state seal clearly visible for the camera. Her voice cut cleanly through Bondi's fury, measured and controlled. "Miss Bondi, I have here a report from the Florida State Auditor's Office, dated March 15th, in the final year of your tenure. This report indicates a discrepancy of $11 billion in budget allocations versus actual expenditure. The legislature allocated the money, but it never appeared in any traceable account. Now I'll ask you plainly, where is it?" Gas rippled through the gallery. Some senators leaned back in their chairs. Others leaned forward, stunned. Even members of Bondi's own party shifted uncomfortably. Bond stood abruptly, her chair screeching across the marble floor. "That's a lie," she shouted, pointing an accusatory finger across the table. "There is no such report. There is no missing money. This is a political ambush, pure and simple." Crockett remained seated, calm as stone. She opened the folder wider, her hand resting on a stack of additional documents. "Then perhaps you'd like to explain why this official report with the seal of your state identifies the discrepancy in plain numbers. Or maybe," she continued, her tone sharpened, "you'd like to explain why my office, after filing multiple FOIA requests and combing through thousands of pages of records, found no trace of programs that supposedly consumed billions of dollars under your leadership." The room erupted again. Photographers leaned forward, their cameras firing like machine guns. Bondi's legal counsel jumped to his feet, his voice trembling with urgency. "Mr. Chairman, I object to this entire line of questioning. Representative Crockett is presenting unverified documents and attempting to smear the nominee with politically motivated slander." The chairman, Senator John Morrison, a Republican, hesitated. His face was tense, caught between party loyalty and the seriousness of what had just been presented. Finally, he raised his gavel again. "Representative Crockett, these are extremely serious accusations. Do you have additional evidence to support them?" Crockett didn't blink. With a subtle nod to her staff, two aides wheeled in a dolly stacked with heavy boxes, each one labeled neatly with dates and file numbers. The sight drew a collective gasp from the gallery. She gestured toward them with a steady hand. "Mr. Chairman, I have 47 pages of evidence," Crockett said, her voice unwavering. "Financial records, internal emails, and whistleblower testimonies. And that," she added, pointing to the dolly, "is just the first box. There are 12 more waiting outside." The noise in the chamber hit a fever pitch. Senators spoke over one another. Reporters typed furiously. Aides dashed in and out of the room with updates from the networks already breaking the story live. Hashtags began trending on social media within minutes. "Where's the money?" "Bondi bombshell." "Crockett receipt." Bondi, her composure unraveling, leaned toward her microphone, her voice trembling between outrage and desperation. "This is an ambush. I wasn't given the chance to review any of these so-called documents. This isn't due process. It's a setup. Crockett leaned in, her voice low but cutting, meant for every microphone in the room. You had 8 years to account for that money. Miss Bondi, the people of Florida have been waiting long enough. How much more time do you need? The chairman, his face pales, slammed the gavel again. We will recess for 15 minutes. Miss Bondi, you and your counsel may review the documents during this break. When we return, I expect clear answers. The room dissolved into chaos. As the senator stood, the audience filed out, and the press mobbed the hall. Protesters outside shouted louder. Now, emboldened by the revelations, Bondi's team huddled in a side room, voices raised in panic. How did we not know about this? Where are these numbers coming from? We need Florida's records now. Toss it. Meanwhile, Crockett remained calm in a separate chamber, surrounded by her aides. She didn't celebrate. She didn't smile. She quietly reviewed her notes, her face set with determination. She knew this was only the beginning. When the hearing reconvened, the atmosphere had shifted completely. The easy confidence of the morning was gone. Republican senators who had expected a smooth confirmation now sat stiff, concern etched across their faces. Democratic senators smelled blood in the water, their eyes sharp and focused. Bondi looked different, too. The unflappable mask she had worn earlier, now cracked, her shoulders tense, her expression betraying fatigue and fear. The chairman addressed, Miss Bondi, have you had sufficient time to review the documents? Bondi's lawyer answered instead, his tone clipped and defensive. Mr. Chairman, we've reviewed what we could in the limited time allowed. These documents are being misrepresented, taken wildly out of context. We request this hearing be postponed until we've had time to properly address these allegations. Request denied, Morrison said firmly, surprising even his own party. The American people deserve answers today. Representative Crockett, you may proceed. Crockett nodded once. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. She adjusted her papers, then looked directly at Bondi. Let's begin with something simple. In fiscal year 2015, your office received a special allocation of $200 million for opioid crisis intervention. Can you tell us with specificity how that money was spent? Bondi swallowed, her throat visibly tightening. That money was distributed to various task forces and prevention programs across the state. Which task forces? Crockett pressed immediately. Which programs? Name them. Bondi stammered. There were numerous programs. I don't have all the names memorized at this time. Crockett slid another document across the table. Let me help you. According to official Florida state records, only 3 opioid programs received funding that year, totaling $12 million. That leaves $1,808 million unaccounted for. Where did it go? The room gasped again. Bondi's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her microphone. Those records are incomplete. There were federal partnerships, multi-agency collaborations. Then provide the documentation. Crockett cut in, her tone calm but firm. Show us the federal matching fund. Show us the interagency agreements. Show us anything proving the money went where you say it did. Bondi's words faltered. I don't have access to those documents here, but you knew you were coming to a confirmation hearing. Crockett shot back, her voice gaining intense. You knew your record would be scrutinized. Why didn't you bring evidence of your major accomplishments? Unless, of course, they don't exist. Bondi's voice cracked as she tried to rally. How dare you question my integrity? I served the people of Florida with honor. Then prove it. Crockett replied simply, her words hanging heavy in the stunned silence that followed. The questioning stretched on, every exchange more devastating than the last. With each document, Crockett unveiled, more discrepancies surfaced. With each question, Bondi contradicted herself, shifting blame to subordinates, or offering vague explanations that fell flat. Senators exchanged glances. Reporters typed furiously. Even Republican allies shifted uneasily in their seats, no longer sure of the ground they stood on. Finally, Senator James Walsh, a conservative stalwart, leaned into his microphone. Miss Bondi, he said gravely, these allegations are deeply concerning. Can you provide any concrete evidence, any at all, that this money was properly spent? Bondi's eyes darted between him and the papers on the table. Senator Walsh, I assure you, the records exist. They're in Florida. They're just not here. Then we need to see them. Walsh replied coldly. He turned to the chairman. I move to postpone this confirmation vote until the nominee can provide full documentation. The motion was seconded almost immediately. The vote was unanimous. For the first time all morning, the committee was united. Bondi's confirmation was effectively dead. Crockett leaned into her microphone, One last time, her voice calm but unyielding. Miss Bondi, the American people trusted you with their money. Florida taxpayers worked hard for every dollar that went missing. They deserve answers. And I promise you, we will not stop until we find them. Bond didn't respond. Her hands shook as she gathered her papers, her eyes downcast, her once steady posture collapsing under the weight of what had just happened. The morning after the hearing, every major newspaper in America carried the same story above the fold. Bondi bombshell, screamed the New York Post. Where's the money? Demanded the Wall Street Journal. The Washington Post headline was blunt. $11 billion question sinks Bondi. Broadcast networks ran wall-to-wall coverage. Cable news played the clips of Crockett's questions on repeat. Each devastating exchange replayed with slow-motion zooms and flashing graphics. Social media exploded with memes, hashtags, and amateur breakdowns of the documents Crockett had unveiled. By dawn, Bondi's confirmation was already being described as effectively over. At 7 Heaven, Jasmine Crockett appeared on Morning Joe, carrying with her a thick stack of evidence she hadn't even presented at the hearing. Calmly, she laid out more examples. A $50 million allocation to a drug prevention company that existed for only 6 months before dissolving. $75 million earmarked for a human trafficking task force that never filed a single report. $100 million for a consumer protection initiative that never produced a single measurable outcome. As she spread the documents across the desk, Mika Bunce leaned forward, her voice hushed. Representative Crockett, are you saying Pam Bondi stole this money? Crockett chose her words carefully. I'm saying the money is missing, and she was responsible for it. Where it went, who benefited, and whether laws were broken, that's for investigators to determine. But the American people deserve to know this. Before giving her more power, within hours, investigative reporters across the country joined the hunt. They began digging into every company and program Bondi's office had ever funded. What they found was staggering. Shell corporations registered to pay boxes, businesses that dissolved before fulfilling contracts, organizations tied to major political donors. The picture that emerged was not just sloppy bookkeeping, but a pattern of systemic corruption. At 2 p.m. that afternoon, Bondi held an emergency press conference in a hotel ballroom. She looked exhausted, her hair uncharacteristically out of place, her voice strained as she read from prepared remarks. Every dollar allocated during my tenure as Florida Attorney General was used for its intended purpose, she insisted. The documentation exists, and I will provide it to any legitimate investigation. This is nothing more than a political hit job orchestrated by Democrats. Reporters shouted questions over one another, the scene chaotic. Where are the documents now? One demanded. Will you withdraw your nomination? Asked another. Bonnie ignored both, plowing through her statement, but she faltered when a reporter near the front raised his phone and shouted, Representative Crockett, just released emails showing you personally directed $15 million to a company owned by your cousin. How do you explain that? Bondi froze, the blood drained from her face. I am not aware of any such emails. They're on the House Judiciary Committee website. The reporter shot back, holding up his phone for the cameras. Your official email address, a transfer to a company incorporated 2 days before receiving the fund. Bondi's lawyer stormed the microphone. This press conference is over, he barked. But the damage was done. Bondi had been cornered and the cameras had captured every second of her unraveling. That same evening, Jasmine Crockett turned over her full cache of evidence to the Department of Justice and the FBI. In a closed-door meeting with federal prosecutors, she laid out the case in painstaking detail. This isn't about politics, she told them. This is about accountability. If we can't hold someone responsible for 11 billion missing taxpayer dollars, then what can we hold them responsible for? The lead prosecutor, Michael Chen, nodded gravely. Representative Crockett, based on what you provided, we're opening a full investigation immediately. As if on 3 former employees of the Florida Attorney General's office came forward that night on CNN. Maria Rodriguez, James Thompson, and Sarah Kim, each of them, visibly nervous, spoke about being silenced when they tried to raise questions about budget discrepancy. We saw the numbers didn't add up, Rodriguez said, her voice shaking. We filed reports, we asked questions, but we were told to keep quiet. I was transferred after I submitted an audit about missing funds. Thompson added, they told us to stop digging. Files disappeared. Computers were wiped. It was a culture of fear. Their testimony was devastating. The next morning, the White House issued a tear statement. In light of recent revelations, Pam Bondi has withdrawn her name from consideration. By noon, Crockett was on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Asked how she found the missing money, she smiled slightly. "Stephen, I was a public defender. I learned long ago that the truth always leaves a trail. You just have to be willing to follow it, no matter where it leads." The audience erupted in applause. Over the next 3 months, federal investigators uncovered a sprawling web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and political slush funds. Indictments came down on 17 people, including lobbyists, contractors, and state officials. Pam Bondi herself was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, misuse of public funds, and obstruction of justice. Her trial, broadcast live, riveted the nation. Jasmine Crockett testified as a key witness, walking jurors through her investigation document by document. Her testimony was calm, factual, and devastating. "I didn't set out to destroy anyone's career," she told the jury. "I set out to find the truth about taxpayer money." The evidence led where it led. The jury deliberated. Just 2 days before returning guilty verdicts on all counts, Bondi was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. As marshals led her away in handcuffs, she passed Jasmine Crockett in the hallway. Their eyes met for a brief moment. Bondi's filled with rage and regret, Crockett steady and unreadable. She nodded once and walked away. The scandal sent shockwaves through American politics. It spurred sweeping reforms in how states tracked and reported public funds. The new standards became known as the Crockett Protocols: mandatory audits, public databases of expenditures, and strict documentation requirements for every dollar spent. Law schools taught Crockett's questioning as a masterclass in oversight. The Harvard Kennedy School launched a Crockett Fellowship for students pursuing careers in government accountability. The media dubbed her the watchdog of Washington. Pam Bondi's fall was equally dramatic. Her law license was suspended. Her political allies deserted her, and her speaking contracts evaporated. She served 7 years in prison before being released on parole, working quietly afterward as a paralegal in a small Florida town. In her only post-release interview, she admitted, "I let ambition cloud my judgment. I betrayed the public trust, and I paid the price." Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's star only rose. She chaired the House Oversight Committee, investigated corruption across party lines, and established the Congressional Accountability Caucus. Her book, Following the Money, became a bestseller, with all proceeds donated to a whistleblower protection fund. In it, she wrote, "This isn't a story about heroes and villains. It's a story about a system that allowed $11 billion to disappear without oversight." Democracy doesn't work on autopilot. It requires vigilance and the courage to ask uncomfortable questions. 10 years later, a monument was erected outside the Florida state capitol. It wasn't a statue, but a simple plaque that read, "In memory of the 11 billion that went missing, and the people who fought to find the truth. May we never forget that public service is a public trust." At the dedication, Crockett, now gray-haired but still sharp, told the crowd, "The money can never be fully recovered, but the lesson we learned is priceless. No one is above the law, and sometimes all it takes is one person willing to ask the right question." In classrooms across America, children studied the case of the missing $11 billion. In newsrooms, journalists cited it as the rebirth of investigative reporting. In government offices, officials thought twice before signing contracts. Haunted by the question Crockett had asked that day, the legacy was clear.